There is something you need to understand before we go any further, because it may completely change the way you think about narcissistic relationships. You may have been told that the only way to deal with a narcissist is no contact. And sometimes no contact really is the healthiest and safest choice, especially when a relationship is abusive, coercive, or continually destabilizing. But there is something deeper than no contact. There is a place you can reach where you are no longer organizing your emotional life around that person at all. You are not waiting for their message. You are not checking whether they noticed your silence. You are not wondering whether they miss you. You are not secretly hoping they will come back so that you can finally reject them. You are not rehearsing conversations in your head. You are not trying to make them understand what they did. You are not trying to prove that you were the good person and they were the problem. You are simply becoming unavailable for the psychological game. And that is where something profound begins to happen. The focus moves away from them and returns to you. You stop asking, what will make them react? And start asking, what will help me heal? You stop asking, how can I make them realize what they lost? And start asking, why did I lose myself trying to be understood? You stop asking, when will they regret hurting me? And start asking, when will I stop allowing their behavior to define my emotional world? That shift may be more important than any tactic you could ever use. Because if your entire healing strategy is still about the narcissistic person, then psychologically, they may still occupy the center of your life, even if you have blocked their phone number. You can have no contact physically and still remain emotionally entangled. You can stop speaking to someone while continuing to argue with them inside your head. You can remove them from your social media while spending hours wondering what they are posting. You can refuse to answer their messages while desperately waiting for another message to arrive. You can walk away from the relationship while still measuring your worth by whether they eventually come looking for you. That is not freedom yet. It is distance, but it may not be emotional liberation. And today, I want you to understand the difference. Because the thing that may truly change everything is not figuring out how to break the narcissist. It is understanding how to stop participating in the psychological cycle that kept you emotionally exhausted. It is learning how to stop explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. It is learning how to stop defending your character every time someone attacks it. It is learning how to stop chasing clarity from someone who repeatedly creates confusion. It is learning how to stop believing that one perfect conversation will suddenly transform years of dysfunctional behavior. And most importantly, it is learning how to return to yourself. If you have spent months or years trying to understand why someone could love you intensely one moment and devalue you the next, why they could make you feel uniquely important and then suddenly treat you as though you were disposable, why they could hurt you and then somehow convince you that you were the one causing the problem, I want you to know something. Your confusion does not mean you are weak. Your attachment does not mean you are foolish. Your desire for answers does not mean you are pathetic. When someone repeatedly creates emotional inconsistency, invalidation, blame, affection, withdrawal, and uncertainty, the nervous system can become preoccupied with trying to predict what happens next. You may become hyper-focused on tone, facial expressions, messages, silences, small changes in behavior, and tiny signs of approval or rejection. You may start believing that if you can just understand the pattern, you can finally protect yourself from it. That is one reason these relationships can be so psychologically exhausting. You are not simply dealing with a difficult person. You may be dealing with a cycle that repeatedly activates your emotions and then leaves you trying to recover from the activation. You may experience affection, then rejection, connection, then distance, praise, then criticism, hope, then disappointment, apology, then repetition, silence, then sudden attention. And because the positive moments can feel so powerful, you may keep believing that the version of the person who made you feel loved is still somewhere underneath everything. You may tell yourself, if I could just get back to who they were in the beginning, everything would be okay. But sometimes the beginning was not a reliable picture of the entire relationship. Sometimes intense early attention can create an emotional bond before deeper patterns become visible. Sometimes what felt like extraordinary compatibility was partly the result of idealization, mirroring, or intense attention. And when the relationship later becomes unstable, you may spend enormous amounts of energy trying to recreate the beginning. You are chasing a memory. You are negotiating with a pattern. You are trying to recover an emotional environment that may never have been sustainable. And that is why your healing cannot depend on getting the old version of the person back. You have to become willing to stop chasing the version of them that existed in your hopes. This is where the idea of doing something instead of no contact becomes important. The alternative is not that you should stay in an abusive relationship and tolerate everything. Absolutely not. If contact is harmful, reducing or ending contact can be essential. If there are safety concerns, professional support, and practical safety planning matter. If someone is threatening, stalking, coercing, or endangering you, this is not about mastering some psychological technique. Your safety comes first. But once you have created appropriate distance, there is another question. What are you going to do with the space? Because creating silence is only the beginning. You have to fill that silence with yourself. You have to rebuild the identity that became buried beneath the relationship. You have to rediscover what you think without asking whether they agree. You have to rediscover what you feel without immediately questioning whether you are allowed to feel it. You have to rediscover what you want without calculating how someone else will react. You have to rediscover what peace feels like when peace no longer depends on another person's mood. That is the deeper work. Imagine someone who has spent years walking on eggshells. They know the sound of a door closing. They know the meaning of a sigh. They know when a message is going to turn into an argument. They know when affection is about to become withdrawal. They know when they need to apologize, even though they are not sure what they did wrong. Then one day they leave. At first, they expect freedom to feel incredible. Instead, it feels strange. The silence feels uncomfortable. They keep checking their phone. They wonder whether the other person has noticed. They wonder if the other person is angry. They wonder whether they should explain themselves one final time. They wonder if they were too harsh. They wonder if they made a mistake. And this is where healing requires patience. Because your mind may understand something before your emotional system does. Your mind may know that the relationship was unhealthy while your heart still misses the person. Both can be true. You can miss someone and still know they were not good for you. You can love someone and still decide that contact with them is damaging. You can remember beautiful moments and still acknowledge painful patterns. You can wish someone well and still refuse to give them access to your life. You do not need to turn a person into a monster in order to justify leaving. And you do not need to hate someone in order to stop choosing them. That is emotional maturity. You do not have to spend the rest of your life proving that they were narcissistic. You do not have to convince everyone who knows them. You do not have to win the court of public opinion. You do not have to create a campaign against them. You do not have to make them feel what they made you feel. Your healing does not require their humiliation. Your freedom does not require their downfall. Your peace does not require their regret. Ride that again in your heart. Your peace does not require their regret. Because one of the hidden traps after narcissistic abuse is that the victim can become psychologically attached to the fantasy of the narcissist finally understanding. You imagine them sitting alone and realizing what they lost. You imagine them remembering everything you did. You imagine them comparing everyone else to you. You imagine them regretting the way they treated you. And maybe they will experience regret. Maybe they will not. People are psychologically complex, and you cannot build your healing around an outcome you cannot control. The moment your healing depends on their regret, they still have emotional authority over you. Think about that. If you need them to apologize before you can feel worthy, they still have authority over your worth. If you need them to admit they lied before you can trust your own memory, they still have authority over your reality. If you need them to say you were a good partner before you can believe it, they still have authority over your identity. If you need them to come back so you can finally reject them, they still have authority over your emotional closure. But when you say, I know what happened, I know what I experienced, I know what I will accept from now on, something changes. You are no longer waiting for permission to believe yourself. And that is powerful. One of the most important things you can do, instead of obsessing over no contact, is to practice emotional non-participation. That does not mean becoming cold. It does not mean becoming cruel. It does not mean pretending you do not care. It means you stop automatically entering every emotional invitation. If someone tries to provoke you, you do not have to prove yourself. If someone misrepresents you, you do not have to write a 10-page defense. If someone suddenly becomes charming after months of disrespect, you do not have to forget the pattern. If someone withdraws affection to make you chase them, you do not have to chase. If someone suddenly becomes angry because you established a boundary, you do not have to interpret their anger as evidence that the boundary was wrong. This is a critical distinction. Their reaction to your boundary is information. It is not necessarily a verdict. A healthy boundary may disappoint someone. A healthy boundary may frustrate someone. A healthy boundary may even make someone angry. That does not automatically make the boundary abusive. Your responsibility is not to prevent another adult from experiencing every uncomfortable emotion. Your responsibility is to behave according to your values. If you say, "I will not continue a conversation when I am being insulted," then the boundary is not, "You are forbidden from insulting me." The boundary is, "If you insult me, I will end the conversation." That is a completely different psychological position. The first attempts to control another person. The second defines your own behavior. And narcissistic dynamics can become especially difficult when the other person is accustomed to your constant availability, explanation, emotional labor, or compliance. If you suddenly stop participating in those patterns, the relationship may feel different. But do not make the mistake of thinking your boundary is successful only if they react positively. Your boundary is successful when you follow through. That is the point. You are not creating boundaries to manipulate someone into becoming respectful. You are creating boundaries because you are becoming respectful toward yourself. And this is where many people experience a profound internal shift. They stop saying, "How do I make them treat me better?" and begin saying, "What will I do if they don't?" That question changes everything because you cannot control another person's honesty. You cannot control another person's empathy. You cannot control another person's accountability. You cannot control another person's willingness to change. But you can decide what you participate in. You can decide what conversations you continue. You can decide what behavior you tolerate. You can decide how much access someone has to you. You can decide whether you keep explaining the same boundary. You can decide whether you continue investing emotional energy in someone who repeatedly demonstrates that they do not handle that access responsibly. That is not revenge. That is self-respect. And self-respect often begins very quietly. It may begin with one unanswered message, one conversation you end, one boundary you stop negotiating, one evening where you do not check their social media, one morning where you wake up and do not immediately wonder what they are doing. One decision to stop asking mutual friends for updates. One moment where you notice yourself wanting to send a long explanation and instead put your phone down. These moments may look small. They are not small. They are repetitions of a new identity. Every time you choose yourself, you teach yourself that your needs matter. Every time you refuse to abandon yourself to keep someone else comfortable, you strengthen your internal foundation. Every time you tolerate the discomfort of not responding, you discover that discomfort is survivable. And eventually, something beautiful happens. The urge becomes weaker, not because you became heartless, because you became grounded. You begin to understand that emotional urgency is not always an instruction. Just because you feel the need to respond does not mean you should respond. Just because you feel anxious does not mean something is wrong. Just because someone is angry does not mean you did something wrong. Just because someone is disappointed does not mean you betrayed them. And just because someone is trying to pull you back into an old dynamic does not mean you have to return. This is emotional regulation. You feel the emotion. You acknowledge the emotion. You allow the emotion to exist. And then you choose your behavior based on your values. That is freedom. You may have spent a long time believing that strength meant being able to endure more. But strength is not always endurance. Sometimes strength is recognizing that you should not have to endure the same injury repeatedly. Strength is leaving the argument. Strength is saying no. Strength is refusing to explain yourself for the 20th time. Strength is allowing someone to misunderstand you without chasing them down to correct the story. Strength is letting people believe whatever version of you they need to believe when you know who you are. And perhaps one of the hardest lessons is this: not everyone deserves access to your explanation. Sometimes you explain because you want fairness. Sometimes you explain because you want understanding. Sometimes you explain because you believe that if they finally hear your full story, they will finally change. But what happens when the person has already heard you? What happens when they understood your words but did not care enough to change their behavior? What happens when you have explained the same pain 5, 20 times? At some point, another explanation is not communication. It is self-abandonment. You are giving more and more of yourself to a conversation that has already demonstrated its limitations. You are trying to solve with better words what may actually require distance. And this is why you should never confuse communication with unlimited access. Healthy communication is reciprocal. It involves listening. It involves accountability. It involves some willingness to understand. When those ingredients are absent, talking more may not create clarity. It may simply create more opportunities for manipulation, denial, blame, or confusion. You do not have to participate. You can say less. You can step back. You can choose silence when silence is healthier. And if you do remain in limited contact because of children, work, family responsibilities, or unavoidable circumstances, you can still practice psychological distance. You can keep communication practical. You can stop discussing your private emotions with someone who repeatedly weaponizes them. You can stop responding immediately. You can keep records where appropriate and necessary. You can communicate clearly. You can refuse unnecessary arguments. You can stop trying to make every interaction emotionally satisfying. This is important because healing does not always require complete physical disappearance. Sometimes life circumstances make that impossible. What matters is that you stop giving unnecessary psychological access. You may still have to communicate, but you do not have to emotionally surrender. You may still hear their words, but you do not have to accept their interpretation of reality. You may still encounter their anger, but you do not have to become angry with them. You may still see their attempts to provoke, but you can choose not to participate. And over time, that can become deeply empowering. There is another thing you must understand. When you begin changing, people who benefited from the old version of you may not immediately celebrate your growth. They may say you have changed. They may accuse you of being cold. They may say you are selfish. They may tell others that you are the problem. They may suddenly become more attentive. They may become more distant. They may test whether your new boundaries are real. And this is where you have to be careful. Do not measure your growth by their reaction. If they call you selfish because you stopped overgiving, examine your behavior. But do not automatically accept their label. If they call you cold because you stopped arguing, ask yourself whether you are actually becoming emotionally healthier. If they accuse you of changing because you no longer tolerate what you once tolerated, remember that change is sometimes exactly what healing looks like. You are allowed to become someone who is harder to manipulate. You are allowed to become someone who thinks before responding. You are allowed to become someone who does not need everyone's approval. You are allowed to become someone who walks away from disrespect. And you are allowed to become someone who does not explain every decision. Your life is not a courtroom where you have to defend every choice. You are not on trial. You do not need to convince everyone that you are good. You need to live in alignment with your values. And this is where self-respect becomes more powerful than validation. Validation says, "Tell me I'm worthy." Self-respect says, "I will treat myself as worthy even when nobody is applauding." Validation says, "Tell me I was right." Self-respect says, "I will learn from my mistakes without allowing someone else to define me." Validation says, "Tell me you regret losing me." Self-respect says, "I do not need your regret to know what I bring to the world." That is the transformation. You stop needing the narcissistic person to become the witness to your worth. You become your own witness. And perhaps that is the part that hurts the most at first. Because when you stop chasing their validation, you have to face yourself. You have to face the loneliness. You have to face the grief. You have to face the question of why you stayed. You have to face the moments where you ignored your own instincts. You have to face the times you accepted less because you were afraid of losing the relationship. And please hear this carefully. Do not turn your healing into another form of self-abuse. Do not use your new awareness to punish your former self. The version of you who stayed was working with the information, hope, attachment, fears, and circumstances available at that time. Maybe you did not know what you know now. Maybe you were trying to save something you deeply valued. Maybe you believed the promises. Maybe you remembered the good moments. Maybe you were afraid of starting over. Maybe you had children. Maybe you depended on the relationship financially. Maybe you had been taught that love meant enduring. Maybe you were simply human. You do not have to hate the person you were in order to become the person you are becoming. Give yourself compassion. You were learning. You are still learning. And healing is not a straight line. There may be mornings when you feel powerful and evenings when you miss them. There may be days when you are certain and nights when you question everything. There may be moments when you feel completely free and then suddenly hear a song, see a place, or remember a conversation and feel the grief return. That does not mean you are going backward. It means you are processing. Healing does not erase memory. It changes the meaning of memory. At first, a memory may feel like an invitation to return. Later, it becomes evidence of what you survived. At first, you may remember the good moments and feel pulled back. Later, you may remember the same moments and understand them in a larger context. At first, you may ask, why did they do this to me? Eventually, you may ask, what did I learn about what I need in a healthy relationship? That is progress. The goal is not to forget. The goal is to integrate. You are taking what happened and refusing to let it dictate what happens next. And this is why you should build a life that has nothing to do with the narcissistic person. Not a life designed to make them jealous. Not a life designed to make them wonder about you. Not a life designed for social media. A real life. A life with quiet mornings. A life with friendships. A life with meaningful work. A life with hobbies. A life with movement. A life with laughter. A life with learning. A life with spiritual or personal reflection, if that matters to you. A life where your nervous system is not constantly waiting for the next emotional emergency. You need experiences that remind you that you are more than what happened to you. Because narcissistic abuse can shrink your psychological world. Everything becomes about the relationship. What did they mean? Why did they say that? Who are they talking to? Why are they ignoring me? Will they come back? Are they lying? Do they love me? Do they hate me? Will they apologize? Will they change? The questions multiply until your entire mental world revolves around another person. Healing is the gradual expansion of that world. Suddenly, there are other questions. What do I want? What do I enjoy? Who am I becoming? What kind of people make me feel safe? What values matter to me? What does peace look like? What does healthy love feel like? What would I do if I were no longer afraid? These questions bring you home, and the more you come home to yourself, the less powerful manipulation becomes. Because manipulation often depends on your emotional urgency. If you desperately need approval, approval can be used as leverage. If you desperately need connection, withdrawal can become leverage. If you desperately need to be understood, misunderstanding can become leverage. If you desperately need the relationship to survive, threats of abandonment can become leverage. But when you become capable of walking away from what violates your core values, the leverage weakens. This does not mean you become invulnerable. Nobody is invulnerable. It means you become less willing to betray yourself for connection. And that is a profound difference. You may still feel fear. You may still feel sadness. You may still wish things had been different. But you stop allowing those feelings to make decisions for you. You begin choosing from wisdom. And wisdom sometimes says, I love you, but I cannot live like this. Wisdom sometimes says, I forgive you, but I will not give you the same access. Wisdom sometimes says, I understand why you behave this way, but understanding you does not require tolerating you. That last sentence is important. Psychological understanding should never become an excuse for continued mistreatment. You can understand that someone's childhood may have influenced their behavior. You can understand insecurity. You can understand emotional wounds. You can understand defensive mechanisms. You can understand why someone struggles with empathy or accountability. And still say no. Compassion does not require self-sacrifice. Understanding does not require access. Forgiveness does not require reconciliation. And empathy does not require tolerance of abuse. You are allowed to hold complexity. You can recognize someone's humanity while protecting yourself from their behavior. That is not cruelty. That is discernment. And discernment is one of the greatest gifts you can develop after a narcissistic relationship. You begin noticing patterns instead of being hypnotized by promises. You begin watching behavior instead of relying only on words. You begin asking whether apologies are followed by changed behavior. You begin noticing whether accountability is consistent. You begin observing how someone handles your boundaries. You begin noticing whether they respect your no. You begin paying attention to how you feel around them. Do you feel safe? Do you feel free? Can you disagree without punishment? Can you express a need without being mocked? Can you make a mistake without being humiliated? Can you have an independent life? Can you say no without fear? These questions are much more useful than asking whether someone can be charming, because charm is not character. Intensity is not intimacy. Chemistry is not compatibility. An apology is not necessarily accountability. And a declaration of love is not necessarily evidence of healthy love. Healthy love creates room for two people to exist. It does not require one person to disappear. And if you have spent years shrinking yourself, your first experience of healthy love may feel surprisingly unfamiliar. You may mistake peace for boredom. You may mistake consistency for lack of passion. You may become suspicious when someone treats you well because your nervous system became accustomed to unpredictability. That is why healing involves retraining your expectations. You are teaching yourself that love does not have to hurt to be meaningful. You are teaching yourself that you do not have to earn basic respect. You are teaching yourself that someone can disagree with you without destroying you. You are teaching yourself that conflict does not have to become chaos. You are teaching yourself that affection does not have to be followed by punishment. And you are learning that stability is not emptiness. Stability is safety. So what do you do when the narcissistic person attempts to pull you back into the old dynamic? You pause. That may be one of the most powerful words in your healing journey. Pause. Do not answer immediately. Do not defend immediately. Do not explain immediately. Do not apologize immediately. Do not decide immediately. Pause. Ask yourself, what is happening right now? Ask, what emotion has been activated? Ask, what does this person want from this interaction? Ask, what do I want? Ask, what response aligns with my values? And sometimes the answer will be no response. Sometimes the answer will be a short response. Sometimes the answer will be a firm boundary. Sometimes the answer will be ending the conversation. And sometimes the answer will be seeking outside support because the situation is too complex to manage alone. You do not have to be a psychological expert to protect yourself. You do not need to diagnose someone. You do not need to prove that they have narcissistic personality disorder. You only need to recognize that a pattern is harmful to you. That distinction can free you. You are allowed to leave a relationship because it hurts you. You do not need a clinical label as permission. You are allowed to establish boundaries because something is unhealthy. You do not need the other person to agree. You are allowed to protect your peace because you value your life. You do not need anyone's approval. And perhaps this is what doing this instead of no contact truly means. It means instead of making no contact another strategy for controlling their reaction, you use distance to reclaim your own attention instead of thinking, I'm going no contact so they will miss me. You think, I'm creating space so I can hear myself again. Instead of thinking, they will finally realize what they lost. You think, I am finally realizing what I lost while trying to keep this relationship alive. Instead of thinking, how long until they reach out? You ask, how long until I stop checking? Instead of thinking, will they regret it? You ask, what will I do with my life now? That is the shift. That is the transformation. And if you are listening to this while sitting alone with tears in your eyes, wondering whether you were ever enough, I want you to hear this clearly. You were never required to become smaller to deserve love. You were never required to tolerate disrespect to prove loyalty. You were never required to abandon your needs to prove compassion. You were never required to keep explaining your pain until someone finally decided it mattered. Your pain mattered when you felt it. Your boundary mattered when you needed it. Your exhaustion mattered before someone else acknowledged it. And your life matters now. Maybe you have spent too long trying to rescue a relationship that required you to rescue yourself first. Maybe you kept waiting for the person to change. Maybe you kept thinking the next conversation would be different. Maybe you kept forgiving without seeing meaningful change. Maybe you kept hoping because hope felt easier than accepting the truth. But there comes a moment in healing when hope has to become honest, not hopeless. Honest. Honest about what you can control. Honest about what you cannot. Honest about what has happened. Honest about what you need. Honest about what you will no longer accept. And honesty can hurt before it heals, because sometimes the truth is not that you did not love enough. The truth is that love cannot compensate for a lack of accountability. Sometimes the truth is not that you failed to communicate. The truth is that communication requires two people willing to engage honestly. Sometimes the truth is not that you were not valuable. The truth is that another person's capacity to appreciate your value is not the measurement of your value. Let that sink in. Their inability to recognize your worth does not reduce your worth. A person can fail to appreciate gold. Gold does not become worthless. A person can misunderstand your heart. Your heart does not become false. A person can reject your love. Your capacity to love does not become shameful. You simply have to learn where your love belongs. And this is where self-empowerment becomes something deeper than confidence. Confidence says, I know I can handle this. Self-empowerment says, even if this hurts, I will not abandon myself. That is stronger. Because courage is not the absence of pain. Courage is refusing to let pain make you betray your values. You may cry, you may grieve, you may miss them, you may feel lonely, you may question yourself, and still move forward. Do not wait until you feel nothing. Move forward while you feel. Healing is not the moment the person disappears from your thoughts. Healing is the moment their presence in your thoughts no longer controls your decisions. You can remember without returning. You can care without reconnecting. You can forgive without reopening the door. You can grieve without going backward. You can love what was good and still reject what was harmful. That is emotional freedom. And eventually, you may notice something remarkable. You wake up, and they are not the first thought. Then you go an entire afternoon without checking. Then you hear their name, and your body does not immediately tense. Then you remember the relationship without feeling the need to rewrite history. Then you realize you are no longer waiting for an apology. Then you realize you do not care who they are dating. Then you realize you are no longer trying to prove that you were the best person they ever had. Then one day, you realize something even bigger. You have stopped asking whether they have moved on because you have, not necessarily from the memory, not necessarily from every emotion, but from the need to live in the emotional orbit of the relationship. You have moved on from needing the past to give you permission to live. And that is the freedom nobody can take from you. So if you are considering no contact, remember that no contact is not a competition. Do not use it as a scoreboard. Do not count how many days they have been silent. Do not measure your worth by whether they reach out. Do not turn your healing into a secret test they must pass. Your healing is not about what they do next. It is about what you do next. If they reach out, you decide what is healthy. If they do not, you keep living. If they apologize, you evaluate behavior rather than getting swept away by words. If they blame you, you do not automatically accept the blame. If they become charming, you remember the larger pattern. If they become angry, you do not surrender your boundary simply to restore temporary peace. If they move on, you grieve if you need to and continue. If they come back, you do not have to reopen the door. You are not responsible for managing their emotional experience. You are responsible for managing your life. And that may be the most liberating sentence you hear today. You are responsible for your life, not their ego, not their reputation, not their healing, not their regret, not their reaction, your life, your mind, your boundaries, your choices, your future, your peace. And when you finally understand that, something inside you becomes quieter. You stop needing to win. You stop needing to punish. You stop needing to prove. You stop needing to expose. You stop needing to make them feel small because you have discovered something far more valuable than revenge. You have discovered irrelevance. Not necessarily that the person never mattered. They may have mattered deeply, but they no longer determine the direction of your life. That is different. And there is dignity in that. You do not have to become the person who hurt you. You do not have to become manipulative because someone manipulated you. You do not have to become emotionally unavailable because someone was emotionally unavailable. You do not have to stop loving because someone misused your love. Instead, become wiser with your love. Become clearer with your boundaries. Become more selective with your trust. Become more attentive to consistency. Become more protective of your emotional energy. Become more honest about what your body and mind experience around certain people. And become deeply committed to never abandoning yourself again. Because perhaps the greatest lesson from narcissistic abuse is not simply learning how narcissistic behavior works. It is learning how your own boundaries work, learning how your own attachment works, learning how your own fear works, learning where you tend to overgive, learning where you ignore red flags, learning where you confuse empathy with responsibility, learning where you believe you have to earn love. That self-knowledge can become a gift. Not because the abuse was a gift. It was not. But because you can choose what you build from what happened. You can take the broken pieces and build discernment. You can take the confusion and build clarity. You can take the betrayal and build stronger boundaries. You can take the loneliness and build a deeper relationship with yourself. You can take the loss and build a larger life. And you can take the version of yourself who once begged to be chosen and teach that person something new. You were always worthy of choosing yourself. You just did not know how. Now you are learning, and learning takes time. So be patient. There may be setbacks. There may be difficult days. There may be moments when you want to reach out. When that happens, do not shame yourself. Ask what you are actually craving. Are you craving the person? Or are you craving relief? Are you craving the relationship? Or are you craving familiarity? Are you craving connection? Or are you craving validation? Are you craving them? Or are you craving the version of yourself you thought you were when they loved you? These questions matter because sometimes what we miss is not the person. We miss certainty, we miss routine, we miss hope, we miss the fantasy. We miss who we believed they could become. And grief becomes easier to process when we stop confusing the fantasy with reality. You can say, I loved what I hoped this could be. You can say, I miss the good moments. You can say, I wish it had been different. And still say, I choose what is healthy for me now. That sentence contains maturity. It contains grief. It contains strength. It contains acceptance. And it contains freedom. So do not become obsessed with making the narcissist feel your absence. Become so present in your own life that their absence stops being the central story. Do not build a life that screams, look what you lost. Build a life that quietly says, I found myself. Do not become successful, so they will regret you. Become fulfilled because your life belongs to you. Do not become beautiful, so they will look back. Take care of yourself because your body deserves kindness. Do not become emotionally detached to punish them. Become emotionally regulated so you can protect your peace. Do not build boundaries to make them chase you. Build boundaries because you finally understand that your access is valuable. And do not wait for the narcissistic person to validate your healing. Let your healing validate itself. Every morning you choose peace is evidence. Every time you refuse to chase is evidence. Every time you say no is evidence. Every time you trust your instincts is evidence. Every time you leave an unhealthy conversation is evidence. Every time you stop abandoning yourself is evidence. You are becoming someone new, not someone harder, someone clearer, not someone colder, someone wiser, not someone incapable of love, someone capable of loving without losing themselves. And that is the real destination. You are not trying to become someone who never feels. You are becoming someone who feels deeply and chooses wisely. You are not trying to become someone who never trusts. You are becoming someone who gives trust gradually and observes consistency. You are not trying to become someone who never needs anyone. You are becoming someone who can connect without surrendering their identity. You are not trying to become someone who is impossible to hurt. You are becoming someone who knows what to do when hurt occurs. And perhaps that is what you were missing all along. You thought strength meant finding the perfect way to deal with the narcissist. But your greatest strength may be realizing that your life cannot be built around dealing with them. Your life must be built around living fully, living honestly, living peacefully, living with boundaries, living with purpose, living without constantly looking over your shoulder. And when you reach that place, you may finally understand why no contact was never supposed to be the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal was never silence. The ultimate goal was freedom. Freedom from the need to explain. Freedom from the need to prove. Freedom from the need to chase. Freedom from the need to monitor. Freedom from the need to decode every message. Freedom from the need to understand every contradiction. Freedom from the need to receive an apology. Freedom from the need to make someone regret losing you. Freedom from the need to be chosen by someone who repeatedly failed to choose you in healthy ways. And that freedom begins with one decision. I will not abandon myself anymore. Say it to yourself. I will not abandon myself anymore. Not when someone is angry. Not when someone withdraws. Not when someone threatens to leave. Not when someone tells you that you are too sensitive. Not when someone refuses to understand. Not when someone tries to make you feel guilty for having needs. Not when someone calls your boundary selfish. Not when someone says you have changed. Yes, you have changed. You are learning. You are growing. You are becoming more conscious of what you allow into your life. And that is not something to apologize for. You do not need to return to the version of yourself that tolerated what you now understand. You are allowed to outgrow your old survival strategies. You are allowed to stop over-explaining. You are allowed to stop rescuing. You are allowed to stop chasing. You are allowed to stop proving. You are allowed to stop waiting. You are allowed to choose peace. And one day, the question will no longer be, what happens to the narcissist when I stop giving them access? The question will be, what happens to me when I finally give myself the life I deserved all along? That is the question worth answering. You begin sleeping more peacefully. You begin thinking more clearly. You begin trusting yourself. You begin laughing again. You begin making plans. You begin meeting people who do not require you to constantly defend your humanity. You begin discovering that healthy connection does not feel like a psychological battlefield. You begin understanding that peace can feel unfamiliar without being wrong. You begin becoming proud of the person you are becoming. And eventually, the relationship becomes one chapter, not the entire book. One chapter, a painful chapter, perhaps, a confusing chapter, a chapter you wish had been different. But still only a chapter, because your story is not over. Your identity is not what happened to you. Your future is not determined by the person who hurt you. Your worth is not determined by whether they appreciated you, and your healing does not need their participation. So if you are walking away today, walk away without needing to make them suffer. Walk away knowing you are choosing yourself. If you are staying in limited contact because circumstances require it, create boundaries without needing their approval. If you are struggling with grief, let yourself grieve without judging the process. If you are tempted to reach out, pause and ask what you truly need. If you are angry, let the anger teach you what boundary was violated. If you are sad, let the sadness remind you that you cared. If you are confused, return to the patterns rather than isolated moments. And if you are beginning again, begin slowly. You do not need to rebuild your entire life in one day. You only need to make the next healthy choice, one choice, then another, then another. Eventually, those choices become a life, and that life becomes proof. Proof that someone else's dysfunction did not get the final word. Proof that manipulation did not define you. Proof that emotional abuse did not erase your capacity for love. Proof that betrayal did not destroy your future. Proof that you can lose a relationship and still find yourself. And perhaps the most powerful thing you can ever do is not make someone regret losing you. It has become so deeply rooted in your own life that whether they regret, it becomes irrelevant. That is when you know you are free. Not when they come back. Not when they apologize. Not when they chase. Not when they break down. Not when they finally admit what they did. You are free when you no longer need any of those things. You are free when your peace is no longer waiting for another person's decision. You are free when your boundaries are no longer negotiations. You are free when your worth is no longer a debate. You are free when you can say, "What happened mattered, but it does not have to control what happens next." And now you get to decide what happens next. You get to build. You get to heal. You get to rest. You get to learn. You get to love differently. You get to choose differently. You get to live differently. And you get to become the person who finally understands that losing yourself for someone else was never the price of love. Healthy love does not demand your disappearance. Healthy connection does not require your silence. Healthy relationships do not require you to constantly prove your worth. And your future does not need to resemble your past. So take your attention back. Take your energy back. Take your time back. Take your voice back. Take your confidence back. Take your life back. Not because you want the narcissist to feel powerless, but because you are done giving your power away. That is the difference. That is the healing. That is the transformation. And perhaps today, for the first time, you can stop asking what will finally break them. Instead, ask what will finally free you. The answer is not revenge. It is not obsession. It is not another psychological game. It is clarity. It is boundaries. It is emotional regulation. It is self-respect. It is support. It is distance when distance is necessary. It is accountability to yourself. It is compassion for the person you were. And it is courage to become the person you are capable of becoming. You do not have to make them feel your absence. You have to feel your own presence again. And once you do, you may discover that you were never as powerless as you thought. You were wounded. You were confused. You were exhausted. You were attached. You were hoping. But you were never without a future. And now that future is calling you. Go toward it, not with hatred, with wisdom, not with revenge, with dignity, not with obsession, with peace, not with the desire to defeat someone, with the determination to never abandon yourself again. Because the greatest thing that can happen after narcissistic abuse is not that the person who hurt you finally understands your value. It is that you finally understand it yourself. And when you understand your value, you stop begging people to treat you like something precious. You begin treating yourself that way. That is where your freedom begins. And that freedom is yours.